If you want to grow in your job and your career, then more often than not, it will require you to switch jobs from time to time. But how exactly do you get those jobs, and how do you do the perfect interview to get them? By the end of this video, you will know how to do an interview effectively and also have the highest chance of actually getting the job. And with some practice, this process of interviewing might even become child's play for you. Well, first things first, before you can even get to an interview, you obviously have to apply for the job first. And here I want to throw one major misconception already out of the window. One thing I hear most often, especially with young graduates, is that for a lot of entry-level positions, they require you to have at least some experience, or a couple years of experience in fact. Just because these adverts require or demand that you have some experience doesn't mean that you shouldn't apply for them even if you don't have that experience. Think about it this way. A job advert displays only the ideal rainbow unicorn candidate. So if they have an option to hire someone for a junior vacancy that already has 2 years of experience, great. But more often than not, this is an ideal scenario and isn't going to be anything remotely realistic. What the companies that write these adverts want to do is find someone that ticks most of those boxes that are stated in the advert. And the more boxes you can check off, the more chances you have of getting the job. Doesn't mean that if you can't tick one of those boxes that by default means that you can't apply for that job. So just apply for it, you never know. A great real life example of this is my fiance. Last year she hesitated to even apply for a job just because she thought she didn't have the necessary credentials. And the rest is history. After a couple of interviews, she got the job and even a 500 euro net wage bump to boot. So a really nice offer. So, moral of the story, even if you're scared or you aren't entirely sure whether you can actually do the job, in most cases you are just underselling yourself and you should just apply and see what becomes of it. Best case, you get an interview or even a job, and worst case, you just get a rejection letter. So just apply for the job and who knows. With regards to the cover letter, just keep it short and simple. Just write a couple lines on why you want the job or why you're applying for the job, and then attach your resume and just click send. Your resume as well should be ideally 1, maximum 2 pages long, and you should also adjust it a little bit depending on the job you're applying for. For example, you are applying for a job which requires a more technical skill set, then it's more important to list all your technical credentials up top or that in a position where they are easily visible so that the recruiter can just skim over them and see immediately what skills you actually have. Or basically, the most important things for the job, list them up top or somewhere where they're easily visible. And why do you want to keep your resume short like this on a 1 or 2 pager? Because in most cases, if it's going to be a really popular job, then there are going to be a lot of applicants for it. And in that case, if a recruiter needs to skim through dozens or even hundreds of CVs, he's going to have to make a quick selection. And if your resume takes a really long time to get through, then in most cases your resume will just get thrown in the trash. What you want to do, if you want to stand a higher chance of getting an interview, is put everything on a 1-pager or a 1-page resume and make everything really easy to read or really easy to skim through. In most cases, if you want to get the most results, then you should put every bit of relevant information regarding the job in a diagonal line starting from the top left to the bottom right. And you may wonder why this is. Well, if I ask you to skim through a commercial folder, for example, more often than not, what people tend to do is start at the top left and then just read from that diagonal line to the bottom right to just get a basic glimpse of what's going to be important in the folder. The same goes for when people need to skim through your resume. That's why you want to keep all the necessary or important information on that line. The basic idea to know if your resume is good enough is that you should give it to a stranger for 5 seconds and they need to be able to get a rough idea of what your skills are. Now, assuming you did all that and the employer calls you over for an interview, now what do you do? Well, it's just the same as with any other project. You prepare for it. The first step here is to look back at the job adverts which you applied for and look at everything that they are asking, or all the skills and competences that they are looking for in a candidate. Then what you do is, for every skill and competence that they require, you list at least one example of where you displayed that skill or competence in a real life situation. And this doesn't have to be a professional situation either. For example, say a job requires you to have some Adobe Photoshop experience, and you also need to be someone who is really stress resistant. Then what you can say is that you used Photoshop extensively for a couple of group projects at school, where you were the one that was, for example, designing all the marketing folders, and that you have a really great case where you were someone, or you were the person that was the most stress resistant because, for example, you saw someone collapse in the street and you immediately called the emergency services and started performing CPR on that person. It's a really extreme example, I know, but it's just one instance, for example, where you can display, okay, I did this and that, and because of this, I am a really stress-resistant person. So just think back on something that you did in your life, in perhaps a hobby, or for example, or something that happened where you displayed those characteristics. There are plenty of examples you can give, even if you don't have work experience, so just think about one of those. And you can bet that the recruiter will ask this one way or the other during the interview process. Next, you can also prepare for the questions that are asked all the time. For example, why did you apply for the job? Why do you want to work here? Or the most common one that you will hear all the time is, where do you see yourself in 5 years? My advice here is to be honest, but also put everything through a filter as well. What you don't want to do is, when they ask you where do you want to be in 4 or 5 years, is that you will say, yeah, okay, I'm going to apply for another job then, even if that might be the case. What you want to say is, I do wish to grow, but preferably within the company if possible. By doing this, you basically said the same thing, that if they cannot offer you any promotion within a couple of years, then you are gone. You basically said the same thing, but also in a less aggressive way, and in a way that they know as well that you are an ambitious person. Also, don't go the other extreme and resort to being a complete fanboy of the company. It rarely works. While it is a great idea to research a company before you apply there, it's also not a good idea to apply for a job at, for example, Tesla, just because you think the company is the best thing since sliced bread. While it is admirable, you can be damn sure that they will see through this and offer you the bare minimum wage even if you get a job offer. Because why would they offer more if they know you are willing to bend over backwards just to work there? Next, a lot of times a recruiter will also ask you for one of your weaknesses. And here it's a good idea to twist your weaknesses into a positive, or use the positive sandwich method. This means stating a positive fact, then a negative fact, and then a positive fact again. And the end result is that a lot of times people will just remember the positives. So really interesting when you are applying for a job. For example, you can say, I am a very detailed-oriented person, but that does mean that sometimes I lose track of time. But because of this, I set time slots in my calendar for specific tasks so that I don't spend too much time on one task. By saying this, you did 3 things. You show them one of your strengths. You are a very accurate worker. You said that you are not fast because of that, but that you are a problem solver who is very self-aware because you already found a solution for that problem. This is way better than just saying that you are a slow worker, isn't it? Also, don't badmouth former coworkers or companies where you worked at. You have nothing to gain by doing so. Even if you had a boss from hell in a previous job, then just say something like, we had wildly different opinions, and just leave it at that. Don't go into more detail. Lastly, character and attitude are the most important factors to show during an interview. The best candidate I ever interviewed wasn't the most qualified. She was just an all-around really positive person who had a really great vibe around her. She wanted to improve, she showed me that she wanted to learn, and overall she was just a really enthusiastic person. Someone who, if you have her in your team, would instantly boost morale across the team. And she was hired immediately, and this makes perfect sense. Even though she wasn't the most qualified or didn't have all the necessary credentials, simply by having her, the company would know they would boost morale all across the floor or the workspace or the work environment. So, and it's actually really logical as well. If you think about it from this perspective, which person would you rather have in your team? A complete sourpuss of a person that always whines and complains, or one that is really enthusiastic, always livens up the place? Well, I would rather have the latter in my team. If you give off the vibe that you are a total buzzkill during an interview and you are applying for a job where you are going to be working in a team, then you can be damn sure, no matter how qualified you are, that the chances of you getting hired are going to be really small. I could go on and give more tips about body language or body posture during an interview, but the ones I already gave are the most important ones, so just keep those in mind. And above all, it's the most important thing rather, is that you are still yourself. I also want to mention that being interviewed is a skill in and of itself, so you do have to do a couple interviews in order to get better at it. So that's also why I say that again, that if you find a job that you are interested in, just apply for it and just go on the interview. Even if you know that 9 out of 10 times you aren't going to get the job, you are still going to have some valuable learning experience. So go out there and practice. Like and subscribe, and if you have any questions, just ask them in the comment section down below. I will answer them when I can. And then I hope to see you next time. Bye.